Hello, my friends. Welcome back. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.
I should have never gone to the Greystone Mill. It wasn't even on the map. At least, not on any map you'd expect. I found it mentioned on a forgotten forum about abandoned industrial sites, hidden away in the woods of upstate New York. The post was short and cryptic: Greystone Mill. Do not enter after sunset. It remembers. I laughed at it at the time. Of course I went. It was late November when I arrived. The sky was overcast, the kind of gray that swallows the horizon. The road ended abruptly at the edge of forest, and there it was, a hulking brick building, partially collapsed, surrounded by a chain-link fence that had long since fallen into decay. Vines had claimed the walls, and shattered windows stared at me like dark eyes. The air smelled faintly of smoke and rot, and my gut tightened as I climbed over the broken fence. The main entrance had been pried open long ago. The doors hung at odd angles, and I had to duck under a rusted metal frame to get inside. The moment I stepped in, I realized this wasn't just old, it was alive. Not alive in a human way, but alive in that way a place absorbs everything that has happened within it and waits. The air inside was cold, sharper than the outside, and carried a metallic tang. I flicked on my flashlight. Dust motes swirled, catching the beam like tiny stars. The main floor was vast and empty. Old conveyor belts twisted across the floor, rusted machinery looming like the skeletons of giants. I moved slowly, documenting with my camera, but the light felt swallowed by the darkness. Every shadow seemed thicker, almost tactile. I found the office wing first. Filing cabinets were overturned, papers scattered across the floor. One document caught my eye, an accident report from 1973. Someone had fallen into a press and was never found. Just gone. No body. The note was crossed out at the bottom with a single sentence scrawled in frantic handwriting. It claimed him. I shook it off and moved on. There was a stairwell leading to the basement. According to every story I'd read, this was where the real horrors happened. I hesitated, flashlight in hand. The stairs were narrow, the wood rotting beneath me. The air grew colder as I descended, each step creaking under my weight. The basement was massive, far bigger than it should have been. Machines that had been dismantled decades ago were still there, or maybe they had returned. Some are buried in dust, some looked freshly oiled. Shadows pooled unnaturally, and I felt the weight of something watching me. I reminded myself I was alone. Then I heard it, a faint scraping noise coming from the far end of the hall. I froze. My flashlight shook in my hand. "Hello," I called, but the sound didn't respond. It just grew closer. I moved toward it anyway. The sound led me to a small room tucked behind a row of rusted machines. Inside were photographs scattered across the floor, black and white images of men and women who had once worked here, all staring directly at the camera. But something was wrong. Their faces were stretched, twisted into expressions of fear and agony. And in some, their eyes seemed hollow, dark holes that drew me in. I began to pick up one photograph. My own face stared back, only it wasn't quite me. The eyes were wrong, the smile too wide. I stumbled backward, heart hammering. That's when I noticed them. Figures in shadows. Tall, thin, pale, faceless, and moving impossibly smoothly. They didn't make a sound, but I could feel them observing me. Slowly, deliberately, they began to encircle me. I turned and ran. The hallways twisted around me. Doors that should have led out led back into the basement again. I ran blindly, crashing into machines, scraping my arms, but the figures followed, always at the edges of my vision, always watching. I tripped and fell, sliding into a storage closet. My flashlight flickered and died. The room was pitch black. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to quiet my breathing, listening to the whispering that seemed to seep through the walls. Stay. Then, unexpectedly, it stopped. Silence. Absolute silence. I didn't move. I waited, but there was nothing. Slowly, I rose, searching for a way out. The closet door opened into a hallway I hadn't seen before. It led to a staircase, and I ran up, finally breaking through a doorway into the night. The forest was quiet, the wind barely rustling the trees. I stumbled down the hill, heart hammering, and didn't stop until I reached my car. I thought I had escaped. The next morning, I awoke in my apartment, exhausted but safe, or so I thought. But there was something off. Small things were different. My reflection in the mirror lingered a moment longer than it should. Shadows moved in ways that didn't make sense. Objects in my apartment seemed too clean, too perfectly placed. I chalked it up to exhaustion. That night, though, I dreamed of the mill. I was walking its hallways again, the faceless figures watching, the photographs on the floor shifting to show me things I didn't want to see. And then I woke up. My camera was on the bed, though I'd left it in my car. Curiosity, my fatal flaw, made me check the photos. Hundreds of new images, each taken from angles I hadn't touched, showing me sleeping, moving, standing in my apartment. And in the last image, one that wasn't possible, I saw the mill behind me, its windows glowing faintly in the dark, as though it had grown arms and was reaching for me. I realized then that the mill had followed me home. Not physically, at least not yet. It existed in the space around me, in shadows and reflections, in places I couldn't see. And something in me had changed. My dreams were no longer mine. I was awake, but I could feel it inside me, whispering, guiding, learning. I tried to leave. I considered running, moving far away, abandoning everything. But every time I stepped outside, the forest seemed closer, the hill higher, the mill's shape pressing through the fog. It wasn't a building anymore. It was a presence, and it knew me. Weeks passed. I stopped sleeping. I stopped taking photos. I started speaking less, seeing less, hiding from the spaces it could touch. And then I understood. The mill didn't just want to trap me in its walls. It wanted to live through me, to exist in the world I walked in. And the only way to keep it satisfied was for me to show it what the living could offer: attention, fear, fascination. So now I wander. I take notes, I document, I photograph. I tell stories, anything to keep it fed. The whispers are always there, and sometimes, in mirrors, I catch a glimpse of the building itself, writhing, stretching, alive in ways I never imagined. The final truth? I didn't survive Greystone Mill. It survived me, and one day it may step out completely. But until then, I walk among the living, carrying it with me, knowing that it's only a matter of time before the building decides it wants more. Some abandoned places aren't just empty. They wait, and Greystone Mill is patient. I thought I knew the mountains. I grew up on the edges of the Appalachian foothills in eastern Tennessee, spending summers wandering through the ridges, fishing in streams, and sleeping under the stars. I had friends who had their own back hollows where they'd go to get away from parents, towns, and anything ordinary. I thought all that was just harmless adventure, until that August, when I realized some places in these mountains are alive, and some things should never be disturbed. My name is Alex. I was 24, broke, restless, and desperate for solitude. I drove into a remote section of the Cherokee National Forest, intent on camping alone for a week. I packed light: tent, sleeping bag, backpack, a small axe, a couple of cans of beans, and a flashlight. My phone had no signal, which I thought was perfect. I want to be alone, and I thought I was prepared. The first 2 days were quiet, almost too quiet. I followed a trail that wound along the ridge, spotting deer, squirrels, and a few hawks circling high above. I fished in a creek, collected firewood, and at night made small fires to cook and keep the chill at bay. The forest seemed alive, but benign. I felt at home, as I always had. On the third day, I found an old path overgrown with brush. It didn't appear on my topo map, which only made me curious. I pushed through the ferns and thorny vines, convinced it would lead to some hidden part of the mountains that few had ever seen. The further I went, the darker the forest became. The canopy thickened, blocking most of the sunlight, and the air felt heavier, damp, and electric. By mid-afternoon, I reached a hollow, so still it seemed unnatural. The only sound was my own breathing and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. The hollow curved in a semicircle, and at its center stood a giant tree, older and wider than any I'd seen. Its bark was gnarled, twisted, almost like a face in the shadows, and the ground around it was bare of leaves or undergrowth, as if life itself had avoided it. I should have turned back. Something about that tree made the hair on my arms rise, but I was drawn to it. I stepped closer, examining the roots that curled like fingers over the earth. That's when I noticed small carvings along the trunk. Symbols, scratches, spirals, circles that seemed almost alive. My stomach tightened. I had seen similar markings years ago in an old, forgotten cabin, but this was older, primal. As I circled the tree, I saw movement in the corner of my eye. Shadows, too tall, too thin, stretching along the edge of the hollow. I froze. The air grew cold, unnaturally cold for August. I heard a whisper, soft, carried not by wind, but by something else. Stay. My heart thudded. I wanted to run, but my feet felt heavy-rooted. I blinked, and the shadows were closer. They didn't move like animals. They drifted, gliding, twisting in ways that made no sense. I could feel them watching, assessing, measuring me. Then the ground beneath me trembled. A low vibration, deep in my chest, like the heartbeat of the mountain itself. I dropped to my knees, the vibration growing stronger, resonating through the hollow. The whispers multiplied, hundreds of voices now, all saying the same word, stay. I tried to scramble backward, but I stumbled over a root and fell. When I looked up, I saw them fully, the shapes of people, twisted, elongated, emerging from the mist that had risen around the tree. They were clothed in tattered rags that seemed to move like living shadows. Their faces, they were blank, smooth skin, like marble, but their eyes burned with pale fire. I scrambled to my feet, ran, but every direction led back to the tree. I was trapped. Panic overtook me. I yelled, screamed, shouted their names, but the hollow swallowed the sound. Then I noticed something even worse. Around the tree, the earth was dotted with small, shallow graves. Bones protruded from the soil, bleached white, some human, some I couldn't identify. The shadows drifted toward these graves, bending down as if tending to them, whispering. I knew then that the tree wasn't just a tree. It was a gathering point, a nexus, and I was trespassing. I fell on my knees and begged out loud this time, "Please let me go. I won't tell anyone. I'll leave." The whispers stopped. Silence pressed down like a physical weight. Then the tallest figure approached me, its blank face tilting, examining me. And I felt it, not with my eyes, but in my mind. A pull, insidious, irresistible. It wanted me to step closer, to kneel, to become part of the hollow. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran straight at the tree, intending to throw myself into the roots, to defy it, to break whatever hold it had on me. The moment my hands touched the bark, the hollow changed. The shadows recoiled, the mist vanished, and the earth shivered violently. I felt a sharp pain, like my consciousness was being ripped from my body. I fell unconscious. When I woke, I was lying on the old logging trail, miles from where the hollow had been. The sun was setting, golden normal. My backpack and gear were where I had left them. No tree, no shadows, no graves. Only the forest, silent and ordinary. I staggered back to my car and drove down the mountain, never looking back. Weeks later, I tried to tell myself it had been a hallucination, a combination of exhaustion, stress, and isolation. But I knew the truth. I couldn't explain it, but part of me had stayed behind. A fragment of my mind, my fear, my awareness lingered in that hollow, a tether I could feel whenever I closed my eyes. Then one night, 2 months later, I got a call from my brother. He was hiking in the mountains near Boone, exploring old trails, and he sounded panicked. "Alex, I think I found your trail," he said. "There's a tree, strange symbols carved into it. I swear it looks like someone's watching me." I felt it immediately. That hollow had found him. And in that instant, I realized something I hadn't understood before. The mountain doesn't just trap you. It waits, biding its time. It passes on what it cannot fully claim. I've never been able to hike in those mountains since. I don't camp, I don't explore, I don't even drive past the ridges without my pulse quickening. And every night, in dreams, I see that hollow. I hear the whispers. I see the shadows. And I know one day it will call again. Because the Appalachian Mountains are patient. They remember, and they always get what they're owed. I'd always loved camping. Growing up, weekends in the mountains were my escape, a chance to breathe and forget the world. But that trip, the one with Matt, Sarah, and Dave, changed everything. I still can't explain what happened, and I don't think I ever will. We drove for hours to reach a remote part of the Appalachians. Matt had discovered it on an old map, a trail no one seemed to take. "This place hasn't seen people in decades," he said as we hiked the last mile. The trail was overgrown, branches clawing at our clothes, roots snaking across the dirt. The sun was low, casting long shadows through the trees. The air smelled sharp and wet, of pine and damp earth. When we finally found the clearing, it was perfect. A small pond reflected the sky, surrounded by thick woods. We pitched our tents and gathered firewood. That first night, we laughed, drank some beers, and told stories. But even as we sat around the fire, I felt uneasy. It started subtly. The wind had shifted, though the air was still. The forest seemed too quiet. Not just quiet, but hollow. When I glanced at the trees, their branches seemed to lean toward us, just a little, like they were listening. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of water. At first, I thought it was the pond, maybe fish jumping. But it wasn't random. It was rhythmic, deliberate. A splash every few seconds, like someone walking through shallow water. I slipped out of my tent and shone my flashlight toward the pond. There was nothing. Then I saw footprints. Huge, human-like, but far too long and narrow. They led from the tree line into the pond, disappearing under the dark water. I felt my stomach twist. I ran back to wake Matt, but when I reached his tent, it was empty. His sleeping bag was disturbed, but he was gone. Sarah and Dave stirred but didn't wake fully. I shook them. Nothing. Matt's gone, I whispered. We searched, calling his name, but the forest didn't respond. Or maybe it did, in a way we couldn't hear. When dawn came, we found the first clue. Along the edge of the clearing, the trees were scarred, bark stripped in long vertical lines. Twigs and leaves were trampled in patterns that made no sense, almost like symbols. That morning, we decided to leave, but the trail back had disappeared. The forest we had walked through the day before was gone, replaced by unfamiliar terrain. The pond stayed in the distance, still and black, though the sky reflected perfectly on it. Every direction looked the same. The air was heavier. I could feel something moving just beyond the tree line, watching. By evening, panic set in. The sun hung low but never seemed to move. We stumbled into a clearing where the pond loomed closer than ever, though I could have sworn we'd been moving away. And that's when I saw them. Figures, standing at the edge of the water. Tall, thin, impossibly still. Their heads tilted at unnatural angles. They didn't move toward us, but they didn't need to. Their presence was enough. Sarah screamed and ran. Dave and I chased her, but she disappeared into the woods. The figures didn't follow. They only watched. I felt a pull toward the pond, a whispering in my mind, urging me forward. I resisted, terrified. Then the water rippled, and Matt emerged. But it wasn't Matt. His face was wrong. Elongated, hollow, his eyes dark and empty. He reached for me. "Come," he said, but it wasn't his voice. I stumbled back in horror. I ran blindly, branches clawing at my skin, roots tripping me. The forest was endless, a labyrinth that refused to let me go. Hours or days passed. I don't know. When I finally collapsed, exhausted, I woke to sunlight, normal sunlight, and a road I recognized. I stumbled to my car. My phone had signal again. I called 911. The search teams found nothing. No trace of Matt, Sarah, or Dave. Just me. Weeks later, I tried to convince myself it had been hallucinations, a nightmare brought on by exhaustion and fear. But then I found it, a photo on my phone, taken while we were setting up camp. I didn't remember taking it. In the corner of the frame, half hidden behind a tree, a figure stood. Tall, thin, faceless, watching. I don't camp anymore. I don't hike. I don't go near forests. And yet, sometimes when I see a pond, a shadow moves beneath the water. I know what it is. They never forget. They wait. And one day, I know, they'll come for me again, or someone else foolish enough to wander too far into the woods. I thought I knew the mountains. Growing up in Virginia, my family had taken me hiking in the Appalachians every summer, always in daylight, always near a ranger station or a trail with markers. But this time, I was going alone, camping deep in a section I'd only heard about in whispers from old-timers in the small town near the trailhead. They called it Hollow Pine, and I've been told it was untouched, wild, and, more than once, a place people shouldn't linger too long. I ignored the warnings. The drive up was long, twisting along roads barely wide enough for one car. Mist rolled through the valleys like smoke, clinging to the trees and curling around the rocks. I parked in a small clearing near a creek, my truck's headlights catching the glint of wet stones and the sudden blackness of the forest beyond. I set up my tent quickly, eager to have light before night fell completely. The first hours passed like any normal camping trip. I made a small fire, cooked some canned beans, and admired the sky as it darkened to deep blue. The stars were brilliant, brighter than I'd ever seen in the city, and the forest smelled of wet earth and pine sap. I told myself this was just a quiet, secluded adventure, peaceful, even comforting. Then the whispers began. At first, I thought it was the wind or maybe a trick of my imagination, but they were distinct, soft, and irregular, almost syllables like someone speaking too far away to understand. I froze, listening, my eyes scanning the tree-line. I saw nothing. Hello. I called, my voice too loud, too sharp. The forest swallowed it. I tried to sleep, but the whispers grew louder, circling my tent. When I finally drifted, I dreamed of the forest bending over me, branches reaching in like hands, shadows pooling in impossible shapes, eyes blinking in rhythm, hundreds of them, waiting. I woke with a start to the sensation of being watched, the fire long dead, the night thicker than before. I decided to hike the next morning, hoping sunlight would bring clarity. The trail was narrower than I expected, twisting and folding back on itself. Every rock, every fallen log seemed slightly different than I remembered passing earlier. My compass spun, my GPS refused to signal. I realized with growing fear that I had no idea which way led back. Then I saw it, a figure crouched in the undergrowth ahead, long-limbed, unnaturally thin. Its skin seemed gray in the shadows, its eyes reflecting light in a way that made my stomach turn. It didn't move toward me, but it didn't move away either. I froze, caught between curiosity and terror. "Hello," I said again. The figure tilted its head, slowly, impossibly, and then vanished. No rustle, no sound, just gone. I blinked, thinking it a trick of the light, but then the whispers returned, louder, forming syllables I could almost understand. Stay, stay, stay. I ran. The trail twisted, the forest closed in. Rocks shifted, roots rose where there had been none. Time lost all meaning. I stumbled into a small clearing and found a ring of stones, blackened at the edges as if they had been burnt. In the center, the earth was bare, churned. I noticed strange carvings on the surrounding trees, crude, jagged symbols I couldn't read, but somehow understood as warnings. I wanted to leave, but the trail had vanished. I was trapped. The whispers became voices, low, guttural, repeating my name. Shapes moved between the trees, watching, always just out of reach. I tried calling for help, screaming, but no sound left my mouth. Panic clawed at my chest as I ran blindly through the undergrowth. Hours later, I think it was hours, I had no concept of time, I stumbled into a creek. The water was cold, bracing. I knelt to drink and saw something in the reflection. Dozens of shadowy figures behind me, their limbs bent at impossible angles, glowing eyes blinking in rhythm. I turned, there was nothing. I ran until I collapsed on the forest floor, exhausted, terrified, and that's when I noticed a stone. Small, black, smooth, pulsing faintly in my hand. I hadn't picked it up. It was simply there. The whispers circled me, forming words I could finally understand. Take it. See. Become. I didn't want to. I tried to throw it, but my hand wouldn't open. The forest bent around me, the shadows pressing closer. The voices spoke in unison. We've waited. You're ours now. I felt my body pulled forward, not physically, but mentally, as if the stone was drawing me into another world layered over this one. The trees stretched and warped. The sky fractured into fragments of gray and black. I glimpsed the clearing, the burnt stones, the shapes pressed against the walls of some unseen cavern. And then I understood. This place wasn't a forest. It was alive, patient, deliberate. It didn't just exist, it claimed. I screamed, but the sound had no weight. The shadows pressed closer, and then I was somewhere else entirely. I woke on the forest floor again, sun overhead, the clearing seemingly ordinary. The creek flowed gently, the air smelled of pine, everything looked peaceful. I blinked, convinced I had dreamed the entire ordeal. But the stone was still in my hand, pulsing alive, and in the corner of my vision, I saw movement, shadows that shouldn't be there, curling in ways that defied physics, shapes bending around trees and rocks in impossible ways. I tried to leave the forest. I ran down the trail, but it twisted endlessly, folding back on itself. Every path led me back to the clearing, to the stone, to the whispers. I realized then that I wasn't just lost, I was chosen. The forest doesn't just trap people. It waits, it selects, and it feeds. I felt the pull of the stone growing stronger every day, guiding me, teaching me. And when night falls, I see the eyes again, blinking, waiting, reminding me that escape isn't part of the forest plan. Weeks later, I told someone I got lost. They didn't believe me, of course. Who would? But I didn't lie about the stone. It rests in my pocket even now, pulsing faintly, a heartbeat, a tether. And every time I glance at it, I feel the pull stronger, whispering to me, promising knowledge, power, and understanding if only I follow it back to the mountains. I know one day I will, and when I do, I won't be alone. The forest will welcome me, and I will become a part of it, just as it intended all along. The Appalachians are beautiful, majestic, inviting, but they are patient, and patient things are dangerous in ways you can never imagine. I had just moved into my first house, a small, single-story place on the edge of town, quiet and ordinary. The kind of neighborhood where everyone mows their lawn at 6 on a Saturday morning and waves politely to strangers. I had been excited for weeks. Finally, a place of my own. The first night, I stayed up later than usual, unpacking, arranging furniture, trying to make the place feel lived in. By 11, the house was quiet. Just me, the faint hum of the refrigerator, and the street outside. I thought I was alone. I was wrong. At first, I noticed it through the corner of my eye, a shadow across the living room window. At first, I tried to dismiss it, telling myself it was the reflection of my lamp, a trick of the dimmed streetlight. But when I glanced properly, I saw a figure. A man, tall, thin, standing just beyond the glow of the street lamp. I froze. He didn't move. He didn't even blink. Just stood there, staring at the house. I stepped back from the window. Maybe he was a neighbor, maybe someone lost. I tried to ignore it, but something didn't feel right. My gut twisted into a tight knot. I locked the doors, checked the windows, and tried to convince myself it was nothing. By midnight, I couldn't take it anymore. I peeked outside the blinds again. The figure was closer, just at the edge of the driveway now. My heart was racing. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but there was no signal. Of course there wasn't. I considered leaving, driving to a hotel, anywhere far from that stare. But every time I thought about opening the door, a wave of dread pinned me in place. I stayed on the couch, pretending to watch TV, though I couldn't focus on anything. The nights that followed were the same. The figure returned each night, always at the same spot, never moving closer, never retreating, always watching. I began to notice other things, small things, shadows that shifted against the walls. The feeling of being touched by a breeze in places where no windows were open. I felt like I was being studied, and the thought made my skin crawl. On the third night, I heard a knock at the front door. I froze. There was nobody there when I looked through the peephole, just the empty porch. But the knock had come from somewhere real, tangible. I tried to dismiss it, but the sense of wrongness stayed. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I barely left the living room. Every creak of the floor made me jump. Every passing car felt like it might hide someone watching me. I began to wonder if I was losing my mind. Then something changed. It wasn't at the driveway anymore. It was closer, at the edge of my yard. I saw it clearly for the first time. Its face was empty, smooth, featureless, pale, not human. Its body moved in perfect silence, like it wasn't constrained by ordinary physics. It raised one arm and pointed at me. I ran inside, locked the door, and stayed there for hours, shaking, unable to breathe properly. The next morning, I considered leaving. I packed a bag and tried to drive to a motel. I didn't get far. As I started the car, I noticed something written across the passenger side window. Not painted, not etched, just there. Words that hadn't been there before. Don't leave. I slammed the door and ran back inside. The figure was on the porch now, staring at me. I realized something terrible. It wasn't outside in a physical sense. It was attached to the house, to me. Wherever I went, it would follow. I tried reasoning with it. "Why are you here?" I shouted. "What do you want?" It tilted its head. No answer. Not even a blink. Just silence and that impossible patience. Over the next week, I noticed more signs. My bedroom window covered in faint scratches, marks on the inside of the door, even the lights flickering when it was near. I tried to leave again and again, but something always stopped me. My car wouldn't start. My phone would die instantly. Roads I knew led to nowhere. I realized then that this wasn't random. This wasn't a prank. This was deliberate. One night, in a surge of desperation, I opened the front door, stepped outside, and confronted it. "I don't know what you want from me," I said. "I'll do anything. Just stop this." The figure didn't move, but then, impossibly, it reached into its own chest and pulled something out. A small, smooth stone, pale, cold, almost alive in my hand. I felt a strange pull, as if the stone was tugging at something inside me. I dropped it. The figure didn't react. Then, slowly, it lifted one hand toward the sky and dissolved. Not into nothing, but into shadows that spread over the street, the neighborhood, the town. A creeping darkness that seemed to whisper, patient and endless. I thought it was over. I didn't know what had happened, but I thought I was safe. The next morning, I awoke to find a note on my kitchen table. Handwriting I didn't recognize. It read, "You invited them in." I tried to leave again. The town felt different now. Familiar streets twisted into impossible angles. Houses I knew were gone, replaced by others I didn't recognize. It was as if the world had shifted. And then I realized the truth. It had never been outside. Not really. It had been waiting for me to notice it, to acknowledge it, to give it a place in my life. And by acknowledging it, by even seeing it, I had let in. I don't know how much time has passed. I lost track of days. Nights and mornings blur. The figure, or what it has become, never leaves. Sometimes I think I can see other shapes moving in the corner of my eyes, shadows that weren't there before. Always waiting, patient, watching. I tried to escape, tried to call help, tried to fight it, but every time I attempt to leave, I find myself back inside the house, on this street, with the same quiet suburban neighborhood and the same shadows. I realize now that it doesn't matter how far I go. Once you invite it in, it follows you everywhere. And the strangest part? I've started noticing people outside, strangers in the street, standing still and watching my windows. I see their faces featureless, blank, and I understand. They are me. I am them. And now I wait, patiently, watching, because that is what it does. That is what I do. And one day, someone else will notice, someone else will invite it in, and the cycle will continue. There is no outside. There is only the watching.
If you enjoyed the chills, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more.